Here is a program on our thiolic journey. So we will talk a little bit about the compounds themselves that we can find on grapes and wine, but then we are going to go through the entire winemaking process and see which step we can do to improve the extraction, to enhance the expression, and also to preserve and protect thiolic compounds from oxidation on juice stage, but also during aging. Okay, so starting with the main compound we can find in grapes and wine, we have the 4-mercaptomethylpentone. This is called also 4-MMP. It has a very low threshold and it smells like boxwood, gooseberries, and sometimes a little bit tropical, but more on the unripe side of the tropical. It gives a lot of freshness to wines. The second thiol is the 3-mercaptohexanol, the 3-MH. This one is very citrusy and tropical fruit. So we are talking about pineapple, mango, passion fruit, a lot of fruits, basically. This compound has a higher threshold, sensory threshold, which means we need a higher concentration to start to smell it. The last compound we will talk about is actually derived from the 3-MH. It's the acetate 3-MH, or the 3-mercaptohexyl acetate. This compound smells like passion fruit, orange zest, so very fresh, very tropical as well, and it has a much lower threshold than the 3-MH, meaning that we don't need as much molecule to smell it. So when the 3-MH is transformed into acetate 3-MH, we are actually increasing the aromatic expression of the wine. So these are the 3 thiolic compounds we can find in wine. Then on grapes, there is only 2, the 4-MMP and the 3-MH, because in fact, these compounds are varietal compounds, so they are found on grapes. When we're talking about white wine, the most stereotyped grapes for thiolic compound, or the example of it, is Sauvignon Blanc. But also it's present in many other varieties such as Vermentino, Chardonnay, Colombard, Chenin Blanc. You have some variety listed there. It's also present on red grapes. So you probably saw it when you make rosé from red grapes. Rosé tend to be very thiolic sometimes. So we understand the compounds are present in reds and they can also be present in red wines. So Grenache, Syrah, Merlot, Mourvèdre, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon are grapes that contain a lot of thiolic compounds. Okay, so these compounds in the grapes are actually not, as you just saw, they are present in precursor form. Precursor form means you have the thiol that is attached to another molecule. In this case, and most commonly, it's attached to a cysteine or a glutathione. So we find back our 3-MH that you can see here attached to a glutathione or a cysteine, and here our 4-MMP attached to glutathione or cysteine. So these molecules are not volatile, are not aromatic, and are not as sensitive as oxidation than the volatile form. To volatilize them or to express them, to liberate the thiol from its precursor, we need an enzymatic activity that is often found into the yeast. So thanks to the yeast, you can express this thiolic compound, and we will talk about it. You need the carbon sulfur lyase activity that will cut, as you see, the scissors, where the scissors are, and liberate the thiolic compound, making it volatile, so smelling. So we will then have our 3-MH and our 4-MMP. 3-MH can then be transformed by the yeast into its acetate, the acetate 3-MH, to basically change a little bit the type of aromas, but also it's going to increase the intensity of the aromas. Okay, so before we go into the winemaking part, let's talk a little bit about the vineyards, because since these compounds are present in the grapes, there is strategies on how to conduct the vineyard to increase or decrease the production of these aromas. Okay, this compound. There is many literature on this. I just want to summarize some of them that are important. So obviously the grape variety, as we saw, the clone and the terroir are gonna have a huge impact on the amount of thiolic compounds you find in grapes, but the vineyard practices as well, and that's where you can play on. A low to moderate hydric stress will increase the production of thiolic precursors, nitrogen fertilization as well, and then foliar nitrogen spray can really have an impact on how much thiolic compounds you find in wine, the impact being positive in this case. The sun and the heat, sun exposure and heat will actually have a negative impact on the thiolic compounds. So they said the way you manage your canopy can be good to be careful with. And the last point is the picking decision, of course, related to the maturation. So as the grapes get more and more ripe, we actually start to, there is a peak of the thiolic compound and then we start to lose them. But the peak of the 4-MMP arrives before the peak of the 3-MH. So if you don't want too much 4-MMP, you can actually pick a little bit later. And if you want more 4-MMP, you can pick earlier. So that's important, but also the time you pick the fruit. So you see on your screen, there is a study that shows how the 3-MH precursor moves along the day in the grape, the concentration of it. And you can see that from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., that's where the precursors are the lowest. So that's where there is a lower concentration. So you do want to pick at night or early morning or very late in the afternoon to really optimize and increase the concentration of these thiolic compounds, which means also when it's cooler and when they don't have direct sun exposure. Okay, so now let's talk about, we pick the grapes, what can we do in terms of winemaking to really optimize these thiolic compounds? The first step is going to be to extract them. These compounds are mostly present in the skin, as you can see on your screen. We look at the 3-MH precursors and the 4-MMP precursor, and you can see that we find much more than actually about double of them, a little bit more even, in the skin. So we need to extract more skin compounds. This can be done with skin contact, maceration, temperature. Higher temperature will increase the extraction, but also the use of enzyme. That's actually a very good way to increase the amount of aromatic compounds in the wine, in the juice, so in the wine, without really increasing too much the other compounds that are not wanted, such as phenolic compound. So the enzyme crush white is what Lamottabier, it's the enzyme that Lamottabier developed for this application. It is a pectinase, highly purified in cinnamyl esterase activity, but also highly concentrated. As you can see in the graph on your screen, we managed to really increase the amount of precursor, but at the end, the amount of thiolic compound present in the final wine, which in this example, we actually more than double the aromatic expression of the wine. So one thing that is important and interesting in the use of enzyme is also that you're going to increase the volume of free run, which means you, for the same volume, same yield from your press fraction, you don't have to press as hard, which means you will not extract as much phenolic compound. So that can be a really good tool to really focus on having more free run, higher quality juices. The next way to extract from the skins are actually using pressing. So the more you press and the more you extract. And then there is the lees tabulation at low temperature. So that's something that can be done. These precursors are more present in the lees. So the lees tabulation means you hold your tank of juice with your lees and you mix them, you keep them in suspension for a few days. You have to be extremely careful with oxidation, so low temperature is important, but also you have to be extremely careful with microbial development. So again, low temperature is important, but use sulfur or use a product such as the Excellence B Nature, which is our non-Saccharomyces yeast, that will inhibit the other microbes and protect your juice without adding too much sulfur. Okay, so I'm happy to talk more about it if you have questions. It is a great idea, but you just have to be careful on some steps. So the second part of the thiolic journey is to make sure we protect them from oxidation. They are very sensitive to oxidation, and for this, want to go very quickly through the oxidation reactions that always start with a phenol that gets oxidized into a quinone, oxidized by the presence of oxygen, but also the activity of PPO or lacase, so oxidative enzymes. And then in wine, when we are looking at chemical reaction, the oxygen has to be activated through a redox reaction, which often start with the presence of iron or copper. This quinone that is being formed and can be formed as soon as there is a phenol in contact with oxygen will be first reacting with glutathione. Glutathione is a natural antioxidant compound present in wine or in grapes, and it will produce a grape reaction product, the GRP. Then the quinone will react with other phenolic compounds, creating browning. Browning in whites and rosé, but loss of color and loss of structure in reds. That's exactly what happened, in fact, when we are opening an apple. There is the same phenolic compound, the same PPO with oxygen, it gets brown. And the last area where the quinone can react is actually aromatic compounds. This including thiolic compounds, so we can lose our thiols like this. So in juice phase, it's important to preserve our natural antioxidant protection, so the glutathione, and of course protect our thiolic precursors too. In wine, we are more talking about protecting our thiolic compounds already produced. So how can we do this? Of course, we can inhibit PPO lacase, but also try to have limit the contact with oxygen. We can limit the extraction of phenolic compounds, and we can increase the content of glutathione, or at least make sure we maintain a good amount of glutathione in our wine to always trap the quinone in this way, avoiding the quinone to react with phenolic compounds and thiolic compounds. So work at low temperature as well will just slow down all these reactions. Inhibit PPO activity with sulfur, with tannin gallical alcohol, which is our tannin developed for this activity for whites and rosé. And then to limit the oxygen presence, I would like to talk to you a little bit about Booker Inertis. So Booker developed a press system that is called Inertis, that is actually a press that is linked to a nitrogen balloon or a lungs or a reservoir of nitrogen. And basically what happened is that it's a fully enclosed system, so there is no contact with oxygen. As soon as the press is full, when the press is pressing and you have juice coming out, the nitrogen will come into the juice pad, protecting the juice coming out. So it's a blanket of nitrogen, permanent blanket of nitrogen. Then once you deflate the membrane and you make any rotation, then the volume is replaced by nitrogen. So there is no air coming into the press. Also, because it is a reservoir, we are recycling the gas, which is a very economical but also sustainable way to press under nitrogen. So basically, this system ensures you that there is zero contact with oxygen during the entire press cycle, which means that when we look at the grapes at the end of the press, they look like the picture that you have in front of you, which means very green. No oxidation at all. When you look at the juice coming out at the end of the press, and we are comparing the same press, same cycle but just one without connecting the nitrogen balloon and the other one with connecting the nitrogen balloon. And you can see that at the end of the press cycle, the classic press cycle were actually very brown as usual at the end of the press. But if we work with a Bucher inertis plugged with the nitrogen balloon, we end up at the end of the press with a very green and super aromatic juice. These differences can be found as well into wine. As you can see in your screen, this is the result of 2 years in a row, a trial where we compare classic press versus Bucher inertis. That's in a rosé. And the result of the wine 2 months after bottling. So you can see, and basically both years we got much more thiolic compounds into the wine that was pressed, into the grapes that were pressed with Bucher inertis. So that's because we are protecting the thiolic compounds, the thiolic precursor compound, but also because we are not even producing any quinone. So we also maintain our glutathione, our natural antioxidant protection of the wine. The other part that we can do is to reduce the phenolic compound extraction. So one way is to just press less hard. Don't go on the high pressure part, but use an enzyme crush white to increase your volume of free run. And the other way is to use a fining in juice or during fermentation. Fining is actually a very interesting step that it's good to think in a preventive way. So it's going to allow you to eliminate any unstable phenolics that would have become a quinone later, or also the quinone themselves, and we can remove them by using a fining. So this allowed you to stabilize your wine regarding oxidation that could happen later down the road. You can eliminate any compounds that are already oxidized, and you obviously improve wine stability in terms of aromas, color, and colloidal, and improve clarification. You can see in the graph here that we're comparing the control with a wine that is fine. Well, it has been fine during fermentation with polymix nature. And basically the wine during aging show much more aromas when it has been fine during fermentation. Not because we produce more aromas, not because we added aromas, but because we actually protected the aromas that we have been producing. Yeah, so which fining agent to use? You can use casein. We have the casein mix, which is our pure potassium caseinate. That's great, especially if you have grapes that are maybe not the cleanest, I would say, because casein mix has also a very good potential and removing of aromas. Polymix is our PVPP casein. That's a great fining agent to really remove phenolics and of aromas in the same time. Then our most successful fining agent for this application is Polymix Nature, which is actually the vegan allergen-free alternative to casein or PVPP casein. It is a PVPP, yeast extract, and bentonite. You can find information of these three fining agents on the website. Okay, so fining at juice stage or during fermentation is actually a very good idea to stabilize, but also because you are not stripping the wine, you are not removing aromas since they are not yet produced. Now, there is one thing that we can do, which is enhancing the amount of thiolic precursors in the wine. So that can be done for few reasons. One could be that you didn't manage to protect very well your juice, so you want to make sure you have enough thiolic precursors to be expressed by the yeast later. But also, if you have grapes that don't have as much expression because they have it's the variety, the terroir, or also because the yield was higher. So to enhance thiolic precursor, you basically have to give glutathione to the yeast. The yeast is able to use glutathione and cysteine as a precursor of thiolic compounds. there is also a pathway where the yeast is able to use glutathione or cysteine with hexenal, which is the molecule that smells like cut grass, so green character. So basically the yeast can transform green character with glutathione into tropical character. So she can, with a glutathione and an hexenal, the yeast is able to actually make a 3-MH. Okay, there is some studies that show this. It's a full process. I'm not gonna go through it, but I'm happy to send you some information if you want. So Lamotabier developed yeast nutrients rich in sulfur peptides, really focusing on increasing the amount of thiolic precursors that we give to the yeast. So here we are really focusing on the cysteine derivative that the yeast can use for producing thiols. As you can see here, there is a trial that we look at the thiolic compound at the end of fermentation and then 9 months after. And you can see that the control is pretty much at the end of fermentation, half of what in terms of thiolic compound produced, half of them compared to the optithiol, where we added, in this case, 15 grams per hectoliters of optithiol. 9 months after, we still find this difference, where the wine that got optithiol is still having double of the thiolic compounds. Regarding the dosage, the more you put, the more you get. So it's really about, you can choose the dosage you want depending the impact you are looking for. If you put, you can see in the graph here, with 15 grams per hectoliter, we pretty much double the amount of thiolic compounds in the wine compared to the control. If we put 30 grams per hectoliter, we double it from the 15. Then one question comes very often, is what about reduction? Because thiolic compounds, as they are sulfur peptides, they can also be mercaptans, which are bad thiolic compounds, so they are responsible of reduction. So, and this could happen, so you have to be extremely careful when you are boosting the thiols, because if you get too reductive, you could become a bit reduced. But also optithiol is not going to be responsible of reductive character. We really look at the formulation to focus on cysteine and cysteine derivatives to boost the yeast to produce thiolic compound and not reductive aromas. So you can see here that we look at the sulfur of aromas, and basically in this trial the optithiol is actually having less sulfur of aromas than the control at the end of the fermentation, but this to say that basically you don't produce more. Okay, so the optithiol would be added at inoculation or at the beginning of fermentation to really give to the yeast precursors of thiolic compounds, but also have an antioxidant, because there is some glutathione here, so there is an antioxidant action. So now we are full of thiolic precursors. Okay, we boost them in the vineyard, we extract them, we protected them, and then we enhance in them at the beginning of fermentation. Let's try to express them. So let's make this big potential of thiolic compound free and expressive, so they can fly in your glass. So this is all about fermentation management. The turbidity, we are looking at a turbidity that is a little bit higher, so 150 to 400 NTU. That's where you will actually boost the varietal aroma production, so the thiolic compound production. Same concept with terpene in reality. When you go lower, when you go very clean, that's where you boost a little bit more the production of esters. Temperature, you want to go a little bit higher in temperature, so 62 to 68 Fahrenheit, that's where the yeast will have a better activity for the expression of thiolic compounds. Then the choice of the yeast is going to be huge. So that's actually the biggest part of expressing thiolic compound, is the choice of the yeast. Lamotabier developed Excellence FTH, which is our yeast really to focus on expressing thiols. So with producing a good amount of 3-MH and acetate 3-MH. Another point is how the yeast is fed. So the yeast, of course, doesn't need to be stressed. The yeast should be having an optimized metabolism and no stress. She prefers organic nitrogen, so it's better to focus on organic nitrogen nutrition. And as we saw before, if you give glutathione to the yeast is able to transform it in a thiol. So organic nitrogen and glutathione are important in terms of yeast nutrition. And the yeast rehydration is actually an essential step into aromatic production in general, because you allow the yeast to be stronger, more resistant, less stress, and so have an optimized metabolism and produce more aromas. This, I want to show it to you in some graph. So La Motabier developed Enostim. Enostim is our yeast protector, rehydration nutrient that we use to promote healthy cells development. It is mostly mineral and sterols and vitamins. It ensures yeast, good yeast implementation, good yeast resistance to stress, but so less sulfur off aroma compounds produced because she's not as stressed. As you can see in the graph here, we produce way less H2S when we use Enostim. Also lower VA as the yeast is not as stressed. In this case, minus 25% using Enostim, and that's something very recurrent. But then a much more aromatic compounds. In this case, we are talking about thiolic compounds, so I'm looking at the thiols now. But the fact that we use Enostim allowed us to express 51% more of the thiolic compound present in the precursors present in the juice. So very essential step to use a yeast rehydrator such as Enostim. There is another way also that is complementary, of course, to express and to increase the expression of aromatic potential is to use an enzyme that will have the activity and will help the yeast releasing the precursor from the thiol. So releasing the thiols and making the thiol volatile and aromatic. La Motabier developed an enzyme thiol that is a very unique enzyme to do this job. So this enzyme can convert thiolic precursors into volatile thiols. As a result, you end up with a wine that has a much more intense aromas, but also much fresher because they are just a bigger expression of the thiolic compounds. It's an enzyme that you can use during fermentation, and if you do use during fermentation, you're gonna really work in synergy with the yeast and increase a lot the production of thiolic compounds and the production of acetate 3-MH, because you give much more 3-MH to the yeast to work with. It's an enzyme that can also be used on finished wine. That's a very interesting strategy if you do have to hold your wine for a long time and you don't want your thiol to be oxidized and, you know, to just be fragile. You can actually decide to keep them a little bit more on their precursor form, not boost too much the expression during fermentation, and then use an enzyme thiol like maybe a month before bottling, where you know you're gonna bottle them and then they are gonna be expressive. So that's a strategy when you do bottle later in the year, or also if you bottle the same wine over a few months. Some tanks that are held like for 6 months might benefit of this enzyme, an enzyme thiol, like just the months before bottling to actually be as fresh and as aromatic as the first one that you bottled. So it is a liquid enzymatic preparation. It's pectinase from Aspergillus niger, TTB approved, that has a specific side activity that allowed your thiolic precursor to be converted into volatile thiols. You can use it during fermentation or during aging, or both, in fact. As a result, so that's what I was trying to tell you, when you use it during fermentation, as you can see here, we are actually having a very big impact, because in addition to increasing the 4-MMP and the 3-MH, we also give a lot of 3-MH to the yeast to transform in acetate 3-MH. So we have a big impact on the acetate 3-MH which is interesting because it has a low threshold. So we really have a huge amount of impact in terms of sensory. When we look at the addition during maturation, we really look at the increase of the 3-MH mostly. A little bit on the 4-MMP, it just happened that in this one it was no 4-MMP, but mostly the impact is going to be on the 3-MH. Okay, so the impact is lower during maturation, but is also different. As a result, we always find the wine more aromatic, fresher, with longer and longer, more persistent aromas than the control. Okay, so the last point is really about protecting your aromas from oxidation during aging and at bottling to make sure we actually maintain a good shelf life. So obviously, good cellar practices are very important. We saw that thiolic compounds are sensitive to oxidation, so managing dissolved oxygen is going to be essential. Limit the headspace, use inert gas, and also use antioxidants. I wanted to share a graph with you that I found interesting about where we compare different aging in different barrels. So used barrel or new barrel, and with racking or not. And you can, and we are looking at the 3-MH in this case, and also the creation of aging or evolution aromas such as rancid and honey, dry flower type. What you can see here is basically when you keep the lees, so if you don't do a racking, that's where you maintain more 3-MH. So the lees have a very good antioxidant protection. So it is very interesting to age on lees, on fine lees. Then the other thing that happens is when you use a new barrel, you will have more tannins extraction and more oxygen, which means more oxidation reaction. So more loss of the 3-MH, as you can see in the graph here. So that's one way to age it, but another way to really improve the aging condition and maintain freshness and also work on the shelf life of your wine is to use antioxidants. Sulfur is one, yes, but there is alternative to sulfur, such as glutathione. We saw it together that glutathione is a very good trap of the quinone that really blocks the quinone on the side, and the quinone is not available to react with other compounds. So that's what we are trying to do here. Glutathione can be, so we talked about the optithiol, but optithiol has been developed really for fermentation with a lot of cysteine to focus on thiolic production. We also develop another formulation that is called Aromatic that is much richer in glutathione, as you can see the composition on your screen here. It is a product that you can use at the end of fermentation that will enrich your wine in glutathione as a natural antioxidant. So it does increase the resistance to oxidation of the wine and elongate the shelf life. Usually 15 to 30 grams per hectoliter is the dosage. Want to show you some results. A trial, so you have a control and Aromatic here. They both have the same amount of thiolic compounds as it's the same wine. We look at it 3 months after, and basically the control 3 months after classic aging lost all his acetate 3-MH and lost 76% of his 3-MH just by oxidation. While if we look at the Aromatic, we didn't lose anything regarding our acetate 3-MH, and we lost only 4% of the 3-MH. So huge impact in terms of protection of the aromas and also improving the shelf life of the wine. Same type of trial, 6 months after fermentation. Here we are looking at how much thiols we lost. So the graph is showing you the reduction in thiols, which you can see the control lost 55 to 75% of its thiols, while the Aromatic lost only 20 to 30% of the thiol in 6 months. So that's a very interesting tool to use as an alternative to sulfur or as a complement of sulfur to really make sure you protect your wine from oxidation. So If I summarize all this presentation for a take-home message for you, basically talking about thiols is really talking about 4 different category of actions. One is going to be the extraction. So you want to extract as much as you can from the grapes because that's where you will extract your potential. We are talking about extracting the precursors here. Maceration can be, pressing, least tabulation, but really the best way is to use an enzyme crush white, which is a pectinase purified in cinnamylesterase activity that will allow you to extract these aromas, aromatic precursor, extract some polysaccharide, but also increase your free run yield so you don't have to press as hard, so you don't have to increase the phenolic compound extraction. For the least tabulation, you want to be careful, so make sure you are cold, make sure you use Excellence B Nature for protecting against microbial development, some sulfur, and also inert gas. The second point is to protect. So you want to make sure you protect your grape and your juice from oxidation, but also your wine. So limit oxygen. There is many things you can do to protect. One of the big steps can be to press inert. The only system that exists to fully press inert is the Booker Inertis. Please ask me after this presentation if you need any information about it. Then you can just remove precursor of oxidation with fining such as Polymix Nature. And then during aging, use Aroma Protect as a source of glutathione, natural antioxidant compound. You can increase the level of aromatic precursor by using OptiThiol. OptiThiol will give cysteine derivate and glutathione to the yeast to be used for and transformed into a thiolic compound. So that's a very good tool. And in fact, when you do have green character, OptiThiol can be used to transform green into tropical. The last part that is one of the most important is the expression of all these precursors, because it's great to have a lot of precursor, but we have to make them volatile to really taste them in the wine. Management of the fermentation is essential. The temperature plays a big role, but what plays the most is the yeast. I recommend the Excellence FTH, so that's for, again, whites and rosé. And then the use of an enzyme thiols during fermentation to really increase the amount of acetate, 3-MH, but also pre-bottling to just give some freshness and boost the aromatic expression of your wine just before bottling.